Alright, so welcome back, guys. Today we're going to be doing Comm 222, Chapter 3, Perception, Attribution, and Diversity. So the legend, as again, everything already in yellow is our chapter title, anything in blue is a heading, and anything green is our subheading. So let's look at the main points for Chapter 3. So number 1, define perception and discuss some of the general factors that influence perception. 2. Explain social identity theory and Bruner's model of the perceptual process. 3. Describe the main biases in person perception. 4. Describe how people form attributions about the causes of behavior and various biases in attribution. Discuss the concepts of workforce diversity and valuing diversity, how racial, ethnic, religious, gender, age, and LGBTQ plus stereotypes affect organizational behavior, and what organizations can do to manage diversity. 6. Discuss the role of perceptions and the perceptual biases in the recruitment and selection, the employment interview, and the performance appraisal. So number 1, what is perception? Well, perception is the process of interpreting the messages of our senses to provide order and meaning to the environment. So I'll highlight that in orange, interpreting messages of our senses. Perception helps us sort out and organize the complex and varied input received by our senses of sight, smell, touch, taste, and hearing. People frequently base their actions on the interpretation of reality that their perceptual system provides rather than on reality itself. So the components of perception. Perception has 3 components: a perceiver, a target being perceived, and some situational context with the perception. So let's talk about the perceiver. The perceiver's experience, needs, and emotions can affect the perception of a target. Experience, its past experience leads the perceiver to develop expectations which affect future and current perceptions. So past experiences develop expectations which affect future and current perceptions. Our needs unconsciously influence our perceptions by causing us to perceive what we wish to perceive. This is our needs. I'm just going to highlight experience in yellow so it makes sense. Alright, so emotions. Emotions such as anger, happiness, fear, or jealousy can influence our perceptions. So emotions influence our perceptions. Perceptual defense, the tendency for the perceptual system to defend the perceiver against unpleasant emotions, blocking out some words or not seeing some actions. So in this case, sometimes you may hear something, but your perception of it, you just block it out because that's something you don't want to hear. And that happens with a lot of people. So the target, perception involves interpreting an addition of meaning to the target. Ambiguous targets are susceptible to interpretation. The perceiver does not use all the information provided by the target. The situation, well, every instance of perception occurs in some situational context. The most important effect that the situation can have is to add information about the target. So let me highlight that. The situation adds information about the target. So 2, social identity theory. So we discuss how perception happens. So to explain social identity theory, let's start by a question. Who are you? Most would answer this with things like I'm a student, I'm Canadian, etc. So most would respond in terms of social categories, which is exactly what social identity theory is. Social identity theory states that people form perceptions of themselves based on their personal characteristics and memberships in social categories. So let me highlight that. Form perceptions of themselves based on personal characteristics in the social categories. So we form perceptions of others based on social categories because social identities are relational and comparative. Social identity theory helps us understand stereotyping and discrimination because members perceive their own social categories more positively and favorable than different categories. So let me highlight that in red. It helps us understand stereotyping, discrimination. So a model of the perceptual process. Jerome Bruner developed a model of perceptual processes that is useful for how we perceive and put together information. So you can see here the model, it's unfamiliar target encountered, then it's openness to the target cues, familiar cues encountered, you have a target categorized, cue selectivity, and then categorization strengthened. So an example of this is you have a new coworker, an observation, you search for information about that coworker. Coworker is Stanford graduate with good grades. Coworker is a good person with great potential. Coworker's poor performance is ignored or distorted. Coworker is still a good person with great potential. So let me explain this a little bit more. So Bruner's model demonstrates three important characteristics of the perpetual process. You have one, selective perception. You perceivers do not use all the available cues, and those they do not use are thus given special emphasis. So the efficiency of our perception aids and hinders our perceptual accuracy. So let me highlight that. So perceivers do not use all the available cues. Constant perception, the tendency for the target to be perceived in the same way over time. Constant perception explains the importance and the value of first impressions. So I'll highlight that. Constant perception is pretty much what first impressions are and how the importance of having a good first impression. Consistent perception, tendency to select and ignore cues that fit together to form a single picture of the target. We only see a person as good or evil, dependable or untrustworthy. So I'll highlight that. To select and ignore cues that fit together to form a single picture. So in this example, when we can see a person as good or evil, sometimes people could be either or depending on days or situations. So 3, basic biases and person perception. The impressions that we form of others are susceptible to a number of perceptual biases. First, we have primary and recency effects. Primary effect, the tendency for a perceiver to rely on early cues or first impressions. So I'll highlight that. Perceiver relies on early cues or first impressions. Recency effect, which people give the last or most recent impressions the most weight. So the last or most recent impression, and that's the recency effect. Reliance on central traits. Central traits is the personal characteristics of a target person that are of particular interest to a perceiver. Central trait has great influence in work settings such as physical appearance. Research shows that attractive people are more likely to fare better than unattractive people in a variety of job-related outcomes. So here I'll just highlight that. Personal characteristics are of interest to a perceiver. So when a perceiver wants specific interest in personal characteristics such as physical appearance. So implicit personality theories. This is implicit personality theories means that personal theories that people have about which personality characteristics go together. So I'll highlight that in red. Personal theories, which personality characteristics go together. So perhaps we'd expect hardworking people to also be honest, or an example of intelligent people to be the most friendly. As well as we can have negative personality characteristics that go together. So we could say that I know a common example in this class was saying how overweight people or overweight workers were more likely to miss work. And so that's a wrongful personality characteristic that you're combining. So projection. Projection is the tendency for perceivers to attribute their own thoughts and feelings to others. Friendly and thoughtful managers might assume the same with workers, but realize inventory keeps disappearing. So sometimes people aren't the same as what you believe they are, and some people just might not have the same attributes and thoughts that you do as well. So stereotyping, it's the tendency to generalize about people in a certain social category and ignore variations among them. So this is probably the biggest and most important thing about this chapter. It's just the importance of stereotyping and what it is. So it's just the generalizing people in a certain social category, and we ignore variations among them. So the problem with stereotypes is you ignore that not everyone is the same in that social category, and that's the mistake that many people do when they stereotype. So many perceivers evoke stereotypes with very little information about the target. So you might see someone from a social category, let's say their race, and many perceivers who stereotype people can just look at them, know nothing about the target, and just evoke a stereotype about them. So that's a really big problem in today's society. So for attribution, perceiving causes and motives. So attribution is the process by which we assign causes or motives to explain people's behaviors. Process by which we assign causes or motives to explain people's behavior. The attribution process is important because rewards and punishments are based on judgments on what caused the target person to behave that way. In making attributions, we must determine whether the behavior is caused by dispositional or situational factors. So let me highlight that, dispositional or situational factors. So dispositional attributions, it's the explanation for behavior based on an actor's personal or intellectual intellect. So behavior on an actor's personality or intellect. Situational attribution is the explanation for behavior based on an actor's external situation or environment. So dispositional is more of the actor or the target themselves. Situational is more about the situation around the target. So since it's not always easy to know people's motives, we are forced to rely on external cues. So an external cues is an example of that is consistency cues. Consistency cues reflect how consistently a person engages in behavior over time. High consistency leads to dispositional attributions. Consensus cues reflect how a person's behavior compares with that of others. Acts that deviate social expectations tell us more about the actor's motives than conforming to social behaviors. So we could see here in this, what this pretty much means is if everyone does something the exact same thing and someone else does it differently, we know more about that person that does it differently because they're not just following what the social norms or social behaviors are. So that's a really good point. So distinctiveness cues. This reflects the extent to which a person engages in some behaviors across a variety of situations. The behavior reflects a person's true motives if it stands up in a variety of environments. So biases in attribution. Earlier, we talked about perceptual biases. The complex task of attribution would also be open to bias. Fundamental attribution error. It's the tendency to overemphasize dispositional explanations for behavior at the expense of situational explanations. Why does fundamental attribution error occur? Well, we discount the strong effects that social roles can have on behaviors. So I'll highlight that because that's very important. So many people might blame behavior solely on the person himself, but we must take into account how social environments or social roles can impact some behaviors. So actor observer effect. It's the tendency for actors and observers to view the causes of the actor's behavior differently. An example of this is the effect of illegal behavior, price fixing, and the bribery of governmental officials. Sometimes there are explanations or um, different viewpoints to why maybe bribery to the government happens and why some government officials take bribery. So self-serving bias. So it's the tendency to take credit for successful outcomes and to deny responsibility for failures. It suggests that people explain that the very same behavior differently depending on the outcome of the event. So what this means is if an event were to be happen, like an event that was caused by the person, if that was a, if it was a successful event, then the person would be happy. They would be saying how great they did. But if the event was bad, then they would blame it on something else. They would deny responsibility, and their behavior would switch depending on if the event was a failure or if the event was a success. So just make sure you're aware of self-serving biases in regards of that. So 5, person perception and workforce diversity. So workforce diversity refers to the differences among employees or potential recruits in characteristics such as gender, race, age, religion, cultural background, physical ability, or sexual orientation. So let me highlight that. The differences among employees or potential recruits in characteristics. And so everyone knows. I'll just highlight that quick. Race, age, religion, cultural background, all of that. So the workforce is becoming more diverse. There is a growing recognition of not successfully managing diversity. So you can see more organizations are open to diversity and are open to successfully managing diversity. So the changing workplace, well, 50 years ago, it was mainly Caucasian and male who were making up the workplace. Now immigration patterns, aging baby boomers, increasing movement of women employment has affected the workplace today. 1 out of 5 people in Canada is foreign born, making Canada one of the most diverse countries in the world. So valuing diversity, organizations should value diversity instead of solely tolerating it. Diversity can yield strategic problem solving and creativity with diverse perspectives into 1, resource acquisition, marketing, problem solving, and many more examples. Diversity climate, well, it's the degree to which an organization advocates fair human resource policies, promotes equal employment opportunities and inclusion, as well as socially integrates underrepresented employees. So I'll highlight that. The degree to which an organization advocates fair human resource policies and then equal employment and socially integrates employees. So stereotypes and workforce diversity. So common workplace stereotypes are based on gender, age, religion, race, ethnicity, and sexual orientation. Stereotypes in the workforce can have a negative effect on how individuals are treated in an organization. Stereotype threat. Members of a social group feel they might be judged or even treated according to a stereotype that their behavior or performance will confirm. So racial or ethnic and religion stereotypes. It's the discrimination in hiring when job applicants have an ethnic sounding name. So racialized individuals found that there are more barriers in their career advancements compared to non-ethnic sounding individuals. So gender stereotypes. This is one of the most problematic stereotypes for organizations and for the past history of organizations. So women in many organizations are not treated equally and are treated with gender bias. Women are underrepresented in managerial and administrative jobs. So age and LGBTQ+. Assumptions made about certain age ranges, and generations like their physical, psychological, and intellectual capabilities. As well as many employees fear that coming out, which they believe will result in bias and discrimination towards them in the workplace and in social environments. So managing workforce diversity. Diversity needs to be managed to have a positive impact on work behavior. Managing organizations are addressing systematic racism and improve their diversity and inclusion programs. Provide a flexible work-life balance and an inclusive workplace. Encourage teamwork that brings minority and majority members together, and train people to be aware of stereotypes and to value diversity. 7. Person perception and human resources management. Perceptions play an important role in human resources management and can influence who gets hired and how employees are evaluated once they are hired. Similarly, job applicants form perceptions during the recruitment and selection process, which can influence whether or not they decide to accept a job offer. Perceptions of recruitment and selection. The way job applicants are treated during the recruitment process influences the likelihood of accepting a job offer. So let me highlight that. I'll highlight in green. So the way job applicants are treated influences the likelihood of accepting the job offer. So signaling theory, job applicants interpret their recruitment and selection experiences as cues or signals about unknown characteristics of a job in an organization and what it will be like to work in an organization. Information that the interview and applicant acquire will have an impact on the final decision. Contrast effects. Previously interviewed job applicants affect an interviewer's perception of a current applicant, leading to an exaggeration of differences between applicants. So what this pretty much means is if you're doing a job interview and the person in front of you did really poorly, then that might affect your interview and the interviewer that's interviewing you, and to maybe assuming that you might be equally as bad, or if you do really good, then you'll excel and make it seem that you were really good because she's comparing you to the previous interviewee. So that's what contrast effect has, and it is very hard for interviewers to not take that into account because it's a human behavior to just compare it to the previous interviewer or interviewee, I should say. So rater errors. So a number of perceptual tendencies occur in performance evaluation. Leniency is the tendency to perceive the performance as especially good. Harshness is the tendency to see the performance as especially ineffective. Central tendency, assigning most ratees to a middle range performance category. The extremes of the rating categories are not used. Similar to the me effect, so raters give more favorable evaluations to people who are similar to the rater in terms of background or attributes or attitudes. So more favorable evaluations to people who are similar to the rater. So behavioral anchored rating scales and frame of reference. Training can improve the accuracy of performance appraisals. So that's it for our rater errors and for our chapter 3. Thank you.